Gay Rawson, and I am going to try to re-record this because I'm not sure the audio yesterday when I spoke to you live at the LTC Leadership Retreat was very good. So let's see if this works a little bit better. I'm going to share my screen with you, and then we shall get started. So I was invited, and I'm thrilled to talk to you today about the new ILR SLDs. ILR stands for Interagency Language Roundtable. It's a group of government, academic, business, all sorts of stakeholders and professionals in terms of language learning. And the skill level descriptors are the proficiency descriptors, the skill level descriptors for all of the different acquisition skills and more. It's a really great group. And they have a whole website that we're going to look at together with information that is really useful to you. The ACTFL sits on this group. I actually sit on the group. I think it's open, so you could investigate sitting on the group. And what's nice about it is that you can see the conversation, and that government, academics, everyone are trying to work together to agree. When we say that someone is intermediate or one or whatever, what's the language that we're looking for? What does that mean? And so it's a great place for us to look, and each organization kind of can modify things a bit on their own, but there's a general agreement around these things. And so that is really helpful. With me today, we're going to focus on interpersonal speaking. I'm a tester. I was a tester for ACTFL. I do test for the government. And so I know both systems. I'm not speaking on behalf of either system, right? The only ACTFL can teach about ACTFL stuff, and vice versa. But I'm just going to share my personal experiences with you as part of this process. I will say that I was fortunate to be involved in some of the rewrites for the new skill level descriptors at a very small level. Much more important people actually wrote them, but I was one of the testers that was asked to kind of rank some of the tests because we wanted to do a better job of distinguishing between very high level speakers, so 4 and 5. And I would put tests in order of which ones they're all, 4s or they're all 5s or whatever. And I actually didn't know the rating, but I would put them in terms of which I thought were the strongest. And then we would talk about why we thought that was the best test. And then the researchers took all of that data and coded it to try to see when we have, trained testers looking at a test, what do they agree on? Where are their disagreements? What kind of language are they describing? And they tried to incorporate that into the skill level descriptors. Then I was part of a group that tested the new skill level descriptors because we wanted to make sure that a 4 with the old descriptors and a 4 with the new one was still a 4. In other words, we wanted the ratings to be the same. The research on language proficiency has evolved over the past 40 years or more. We wanted that to be represented, but we did want to have consistency. And so I was a tester using the old system. So I would listen to a test and I'd rate it using the old skill level descriptors, and then other testers would rate it using the new skill level descriptors. We didn't talk to each other or know each other, nothing. But then the researchers would look to see if we lined up, and we did. And so they will argue with that. And I mean, they have data to show that the ratings should be the same with the old and the new system. So the new system is kind of exciting. I like it because I think it does do a better job of describing the language and the factors that go into what we really mean. So I see it as clarifying the older skill level descriptors. And it's nice to know, right, that there's still this consistency between what a 2 was before and what a 2 is now, but it's just a little easier to understand, maybe. I mean, that's just my unofficial take on things. So let's get going and take a look. As I said, I don't have the authority to speak on behalf of anyone other than myself. So I'm sharing my personal experience. And, for us in the LTC, we kind of have a unique role because we use the ACTFL system for our pre and post testing, the computerized oral proficiency interviews, or OPIC. But then the soldiers all are rated on the defense system, which uses the numbers 0 to 5. 4 and 5 or 5 may not even exist on the actual system. There's a debate. We're going to talk about it in a little bit. So we have to kind of walk between both worlds. So what I'm trying to do here is just give you a list of things I look for that kind of combine some of the language ACTFL uses, some of the language the skill level descriptors use. Again, in the ideal world, those are supposed to be consistent with each other. And so I'm showing you some things to think about to hopefully help us better elicit the language that a rater would need when they're listening to our soldiers speak, and then also to help know how to help our soldiers develop to that next proficiency level. So we're going to talk about what interpersonal speaking is, motivating speakers to speak, comparing ACTFL and ILR, then looking at the new skill level descriptors, and then trying to think about how we could get a rateable sample at levels 2 through 5. I picked those levels to focus on because I think that's where most of our soldiers are or want to be. And so we will go there. Because I'm re-recording what we talked about, there won't be a lot of time for questions. I'm doing this by myself in my hotel room, but you can reach out to me anytime. My contact information is on the last slide. So let's get started. So my goal is by the end of this, but if you're watching this, that you will have a better understanding of what the new ILR skill level descriptors are and how that might be useful to your work. And then also ideas for eliciting a rateable sample, especially at levels 2, 3, and 4. I know we probably don't have any 5s, but one of the things that the new skill level descriptors do is really provide more information on how to distinguish between 4 and 5. So I think that that can be helpful. So first, I asked the group yesterday to think about what is interpersonal speaking. What should we be looking for? What can you not do? And we had a really great conversation, and people talked about, it's a conversation, it's communication between two people. Absolutely. Right. This is not interpersonal. What I'm doing is presentational right now. I am talking to my camera. I'm talking to you. In an interpersonal situation, we got to go back and forth, and there are going to be barriers to our communication. That's kind of why I picked this picture, because maybe I didn't hear you. That was the case yesterday. My internet connection was bad. So I had to ask for clarification. You had to repeat. You guys had questions about what I was saying, right? And so we kind of go back and forth asking questions to try to figure out what the other person is saying. We got to listen. Interpersonal speaking involves listening and speaking. And that's really important. We need to, be giving our attention to that person, taking in what they're saying, processing it, and then giving something back. I asked, what can you not do? And my short answer is actually on the next slide. And that is that we should not be giving our students a script. Now, remember, I'm talking about proficiency at the higher levels a little bit, right? At levels 0 and 1. They might only be able to use memorized material. They still shouldn't have a script, but in an interpersonal conversation, a level 1 person and a level 0 person, they're just recombining stuff they've memorized, right? They may not always be able to say what they want to say. At level 1, of course, they can do this more, but they're kind of taking pieces. If I ask, do you like French fries? They might say, yes, you like French fries, right? Because they don't know to change you to I. Or they might say, yes, I like, and then they'll put in what they like. I like fish. But they may not be able to say, no, I don't like French fries. I really like fish and rice, right? That's a higher level thing. So we will be hearing memorized chunks, right? But I hope you can see that that's different than us giving them a script and saying, okay, you read this part and you read this part, memorize it, and then go, right? That's not interpersonal speaking. That's them presenting something they've memorized. In interpersonal speaking, we give them a task, we give them a topic. I am a fan of task-based learning, performance assessments, right? We give them sort of a mission. Our soldiers love that. And we say, okay, here's the scenario, go. Or we're going to have a conversation about X, pick a topic from your curriculum. And then, they will start talking about it. Because what we're looking for in interpersonal speaking is that negotiation of meaning, right? That's what happens in a normal conversation. And we had a great sample in our live class yesterday, where we have to ask questions to clarify. We're going back and forth. We're figuring things out together. And so that's kind of what we're looking for in interpersonal speaking. This picture I picked because The new skill level descriptors really make it clear, to me anyways, that the social context, the cultural context, the relational context, these different pieces are actually part of the conversation. We are co-creating meaning together in an interpersonal speaking situation. And so, we're looking at, is this culturally appropriate? Is this appropriate for this social situation? If we ask somebody to talk about, to talk to a group of college students and they are, using slang all the time, we may or may not think that's appropriate, right? Maybe we wanted something a little more formal for a speech to college students. If they are talking to a group of kindergartners and they're using very formal language, that's not appropriate, right? And so we are looking at the context, we're looking at the culture, we're looking at all of these pieces when we're thinking about the interpersonal speaking that we see coming from our students. So when this is just a reminder of the World Readiness Standards, and you can see here the modes of communication around the side. So we're kind of situated in this interpersonal section, and we're focusing on listening and speaking here. They go together, right? But there are other kinds of interpersonal. You can see the acquisition skills around the outside of the circle, right? And then the 5 C's, always nice to kind of remember them. And our goal is really communication, right? So how well are the soldiers able to communicate, their message in an interpersonal setting? That's what we want to think about. And this 90%, I forgot to change it twice now. That's what I tell students in our college classrooms. Of course, in the language training centers, we're shooting for 100% target language, right? We are only speaking to them in the target language 100% of the time. And it's really great for them to be listening and processing that language all day, every day. That is important and very helpful in their development. These are the similar patterns with just a little bit of a twist, right? The picture on the left, you kind of see that performance assessment in the middle, really giving them something that they are, trying to accomplish and do, can help focus the communication and goals. The one on the right I picked because, of course, while in my program, I chose to really focus on, we did all the modes of communication, but I focused on interpersonal because a lot of what they need to do is be able to talk back and forth in French, or for me, French, to accomplish their job. And if they can't do that, it's harder sometimes to get to other things. So to have that conversational ability, but it is, of course, around content. So don't think that like developing interpersonal competence needs to be on the side. You take whatever you're talking about and you have them have a conversation about it, right? An unscripted conversation about it. They're not just presenting a topic, but discussing it with them in the center. That's actually my next picture, right? We put the student, the I, in the center here. And you guys did a fantastic job yesterday, really. I was so impressed. You guys did a great job talking about, starting with the soldier and finding about his or her interests and what they liked and what their passions were. Absolutely, right? That's my first question on all of my, oral proficiency interviews is, tell me about yourself. Right. And it's really great to let them talk. They should be doing most of the talking. At the lower levels, right? Well, at 0, they can only say, lists and phrases, some isolated words. 0+, they can do a little bit more. But even at 1, they are mostly talking about themselves, their family, their friends, their dogs, their everyday life. And so knowing themselves is really a great first place to start with the language. Even if they're higher levels, start there and then build out, get to know their interests, include their interests when you can. We all like to talk about our favorite things. At level 1, those everyday topics, their world that they know, that might not be all that they can talk about, and that's okay at level 1. But at level 2, and this is not the way this image was meant to be used, but that's how I'm going to use it today, right? At level 2, we want to start engaging with the world. Tell me about your sister. Tell me about your brother. That's actually a much harder task than tell me about yourself. What current events are you watching? So at level 1, you guys had some great suggestions. Tell me about your daily schedule. What do you do on the weekend, right? Present tense, things that are open-ended. Level 2, we want to say, what news stories are you following, right? And we want to try to get that engagement with the world. And at the higher levels, we're going to open that circle up even more to ask them to think about different communities and different concepts and more abstract things, and bring in more complexities and sophistication at level 4 and so forth. So it's really kind of concentric circles expanding out more than the graph shows here. Like I said, I've just co-opted this for some other uses, but of course those overlap. And of course, somebody's moving in and out of them in different ways, but it's great to start with our soldiers where they're at. So why should you care about this? Why do we care about it? I understand that, the language villages we use the pre and post OPIC for measuring the proficiency gains in our LDC programs. And so, we include that on our grant information. We talk about, what we see happening in terms of movement and how we can measure that. And the OPIC is a great way to do it. I think it is even more important than just, something that we're doing for, somebody else, for a grant, right? Which is important. But for me, it's even more important because this, it's directly pertinent to our soldiers' job. And it literally may be a question of life and death for some of them, right? My soldiers, weren't allowed to share much, but some of the situations they were in, it was life and death. And being able to communicate in French and understand what other people were saying was essential. And so, they need to develop this capacity, and it is helpful for them to know where they're at and what they can do, where they are falling short, and then what they can do, the pieces to focus on, like, here's the piece you're missing from level 2, let's work on this, right? So for you and your teachers to think about things in this way, I'm hoping could be helpful to you. So before we go there, I did want to just remind you all, this because you guys are great, but, thinking about motivating our students, it's hard when we can't say what we want to say in a second language. We've probably all been there because we are all multilingual, or we speak more than one language. So I asked the group yesterday to think about something they do to motivate reticent speakers, and they came up with a great list. I'm not going to remember all of it, so forgive me, but they talked about, like we said, starting with their interests and their passions, asking them, open-ended questions, encouraging them to talk, maybe one-on-one conversations with the teacher, small groups, competitive games, getting them to speak and want to share, because my group especially was very competitive. So anything that can be made into a game can be helpful, but just really remembering that it's about their speaking and their development. We can say what we want to say in the language, but they're working on it, and it's hard when you hit that wall. And so to keep in mind strategies to, let them know it's okay, help them, find other ways to express things, can really be important, especially for that student that can't get the words out yet. For me, and another thing that's helpful is I show my, intermediate students, and I say, here's what you should be able to do. This is what our goal is for the end of our class. Here's all the stuff you can't do yet, right? And I say that not to discourage them, and I tell them that too, but just so that, like, if they're expecting that they can tell a story in the past, an intermediate student cannot tell a story in the past perfectly all the time. They can do it a little bit, they can do it sometimes, they can't do it all the time. And so, my students think that that's so dumb, so easy. Like, I used to ask my class, what'd you do this weekend? In my first year class, and they knew weekend, they knew they knew the verb do. So I was thinking, easy question. Well, that requires a past tense answer. My novice students couldn't answer it. And I used to be frustrated, like, come on, what don't you understand? You, weekend, do. Well, they understood the question. They didn't have the language to put it in the past, right? Even though I had taught them the past, they didn't have the language to put it together in a sentence in the past, because that's an intermediate task. And using the past actually is into the advanced area. Now, there's, proficiency is an inverted cone, easy to fill up at the bottom, harder and harder as you go around. So of course, an intermediate person is speaking in the past, a lot, but they can't sustain it in all time frames all the time, right? And so for me to ask a beginning student that was inappropriate. My question was wrong. I needed to change my question. When I would say, oh, did you go to the movies or did you go eat in a restaurant? They'd say restaurant. Oh, did you get takeout or did you get Chinese food? They could tell me when I was giving them appropriate questions at zero, eliciting lists. What did you eat? They could give me a list of food they ate, right? Then they had a lot to say and they were excited to say it. So for me, this proficiency has been transformational because it helped me ask better questions. Then the students could feel successful because they had the language to answer it when I changed my question. So I hope that you can have the same experience with your students. All right, so here's a little comparison. I need to say, in my opinion, and if somebody knows better, send it to me. There isn't a direct equivalent. And when I do my trainings, I know I'm trained in both of these scales. I'd say, oh, 1, that's intermediate. And they'd be like, it's not. There is no exact equivalency. And they really tried to to get the other scale out of my head. So I spent a great many years. I was a tester for ACTFL in the early 2000s, so over 20 years, testing, with the government scale for almost 15 years, right? And I spent a lot of time trying to get the other scale out of my head because there isn't an agreed upon way that these line up every time, right? ACTFL goes novice to superior. The government scale goes 0 to 5. ACTFL now has distinguished. So ACTFL goes novice to distinguished. But there's nothing above that, right? And the government still has, you can see here, this chart said superior 3 and above. Well, the government has 4 and 5, right? They have a lot more up there. ACTFL divides things into sub-levels. The government has plus levels. So there isn't, and I saw charts that said that superior was 4. That doesn't feel right to me. But just so you know, a lot of different people come up with these grids, and then a lot of other people come up with a different grid. I picked this one because it's what I see, what I feel like personally I have seen the most, but it is important to know we're really talking about 2 different things. If somebody is intermediate, and the OPIC will give us a novice to superior score, right? So they might come back as intermediate mid, or, that does not mean they're a 1 necessarily, right? The tests are different. It's kind of an approximation, and we walk in both worlds. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that and put that out there for us. All right, so here's another scale, and you can see this one sort of, they didn't divide out all the sub-levels, right? Because you can't. So this column here on language function, I think is helpful for us to see. So that novice person, again, lists, phrases, isolated words, stuff they've memorized, minimal communication. They're kind of remixing stuff. Number 1, huge jump in our ice cream cone of, proficiency. They can create with language. They can say what they want to say. They can ask and answer questions. They can have a simple conversation. They can handle simple transactions. And I think, this last column of who's likely to study here, I kind of have some questions about that. But this job one, I have questions about that too, but I think it's kind of interesting, right? So simple transactions, that's your cashier, sales clerk, receptionist, right? There's a whole bunch of things that can already do with this survival language. Now we move into level 2. So level 1, sentence level. Number 2, we're starting to be in paragraphs. Paragraphs, by the way, are not just a bunch of sentences together, but it's an actual cohesive, organized paragraph where they're narrating in the past, present, and future, and they can handle unanticipated complications. It's a huge jump, right? And look at, this is where our teachers are. This is, some of the different specialists. These are, military linguists, translation officers. And I don't know that this is an official, grid, but this is where somebody put them, right? It depends on your institution. Some places require you to be a 3 or a 4 to do interpreting. Other places, they need you to do it at a lower level. But that's a big jump. And then for superior, discussing topics extensively, supporting opinion, hypothesizing, dealing with unfamiliar situations. A superior speaker can talk on, all different kinds of topics with no patterned errors. So that's another huge jump. It is very hard to move up here. And so it is true for my job at Concordia, you had to have superior rating. So for a lot of university professors, you have to be at least superior in the language. To be a K through 12 teacher, you need to be intermediate high in Minnesota. You need to be advanced low in many other states. And, you know, this is not, I'm not going through all the proficiency with you today, but an intermediate high speaker functions at the advanced low level most of the time. They're like a fallen advanced low. They look like advanced low, they're doing advanced low stuff, you know, 99% of the time. They just couldn't sustain it 100% of the time. So that's where I was trying to say, like an intermediate speaker, they can probably answer, what did you do this weekend? A novice speaker probably can't, but an intermediate speaker could some or most of the time, but not all the time, right? And so interesting to think about that. One of the issues that we came across with the old skill level descriptors, and it comes up in this last column here, you can see superior is linked to well-educated native speakers. What does that mean? Who is that, right? I would test people who were native speakers and they were twos. And they'd be really frustrated. And, you know, most of our life, we kind of spend at the one level, right? Like I come home, I say to my husband, how was your day? You know, I say to the kids, what do you want for dinner? Like that's level one stuff. My kids, their answers are isolated words, good, you know, French fries, McDonald's, right? Like they're not giving me much some days. So we have to go out of our way to have level 3 and higher conversations. It's not part of our daily life. And so it's not a surprise that, you know, many native speakers are in the 2 range for their first language I'm talking about, right? And so, you know, there you have it. And it doesn't mean like just because you're a graduate, you know, or you have a PhD, doesn't mean you're a level 4 or 5. You might be. It's not always the case. We've seen people that don't have an education that are self-taught, that are 5s. You know, we've seen people that have PhDs that are lower, right? And I've had some graduate students that still fall into the 2 range because they couldn't talk about anything other than their thesis. And that's the only topic they could talk about. They could talk about that all day long, but any other topic, they didn't know what to say. So, you know, we found that education wasn't the predictor that we thought it was, and that's been taken out of the new skill level descriptors. So, all right, I've been teasing them. Let's take a look. These links I've sent out to Sham, so you'll be able to get them. I'm going to click right here, and we're going to go to the Interagency Language Roundtable site. You can see they've been around for over 50 years. The old skill level descriptors are here, and the new ones are here. And I forgot to mention this, but there is some self-assessment that I think is pretty useful. I'm thinking of using these more, where you can ask the soldiers to take a look at these and self-assess what they can do. But that wasn't part of what I said yesterday, so we're going to move on for now. But you can read the introduction, you can get to the speaking ones here, but I want to show you this crosswalk matrix first. And I want to take a minute kind of going through it with you. So I would encourage you to download this to your computer and to come back to this, right? So it's got all of the skills: speaking, listening, reading, writing. We're focusing on speaking today. And it's got the main statement that summarizes what they can do. There are 4 areas now that we are evaluating. And we were doing this before, but they weren't clearly defined. So now they are clearly defined. We are looking at their functional ability, so what they can do with the language. You see that's in green. We're looking at precision of forms and meaning. That's number 2. That's in this orangey color, right? We are looking at content meaningfulness. That's number 3, gray, and contextual appropriateness. That's number 4, blue. So those are the 4 things that we are evaluating. The main statement is a global statement describing what can be done at that level. And then we go into the details of each one of these 4 areas. So functional ability, what they can do. Precision of forms and meaning. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one than the other categories, because for a lot of us, especially under the old system, This is what we looked at, and this is kind of all some people looked at. And now this is 1 out of 4 things that you need to look at. So what is in this category? First is discourse management and text type. So that's, is it a sentence, a paragraph, isolated words, extended discourse, right? That's, how is it organized? Is it cohesive? That's all in discourse management and text type. Lexical control, that's essentially vocab. Structural control, that's essentially grammar. Orthographic phonetic features, that's pronunciation, stress, pitch, right? Are they understandable? Okay. So if you think about that, like vocab, grammar, pronunciation, organization, all 4 of those things are in 1 category now, 1. And so that changes how I really think about my tests. Because sometimes I would get hung up on somebody that had really bad, grammar mistakes or really great vocab, and I maybe rated them too high or too low because I would forget about the other stuff because I'd be so excited about or so annoyed by something, right? But this new form really helps me remember that's 1 part, and it's an important part, but it's 1 part of 4. Let's look at number 3, content meaningfulness. I love that this has been spelled out because before I didn't always know where to put this, right? Can they talk about more than 1 thing? So that's the range, right? That's that person that only has 1 topic they can only talk about. Now I know where to put it. I can put it right here. I asked them 10 questions on these other things. They kept saying, I don't know, I don't care, whatever. You can say that a couple times, but not over and over again. You need to show me that you can talk about more than 1 thing. It's irrelevant. I've had so many tests where I ask a question and they decide they don't want to say that and they say something else, or I'll ask them to give me an hypothesis and they keep supporting an opinion. So there's a disconnect between what they were asked to do and what they provided. And then that coverage. Did they talk enough, but not too much, not too little, right? I have students that will answer in a sentence, probably not enough. I have people that will want to talk for 10 minutes, way too much, right? And so understanding how to treat a topic and be organized enough to do it, that's important. And then section 4, this contextual appropriateness, right? And I mentioned this, is it culturally appropriate? Is it socially appropriate, right? And is it interactionally appropriate? Are they taking turns? Are they being appropriate in what they're saying? I've had people, say things that were wildly inappropriate, and, be aggressive in an exam setting, right? And, we do role plays. It's okay to do some of that, but some of that is not socially appropriate. It's not appropriate in the interactional situation that we're in, right? And that matters, when you're having a conversation with somebody. So, you think about that dinner party where you've been backed into a corner by somebody who's, spouting aggressive, whatever stances on whatever topic, and they don't know how to stop talking and you don't know how to get away. That's somebody that is breaking all of these rules of contextual appropriateness. Now there's a place where we can put that in the conversation. And it also helps us help our soldiers know, hey, culture matters. The social context matters, the interactual appropriateness matters. Are you making good eye contact or not? As a woman, I was talking to somebody yesterday who, for whom it was not appropriate to shake hands, right? And I knew it, thank goodness, because he was reaching out and extending his hand to other people. And he came to me very politely, very respectfully, and, kind of like did the appropriate gestures of respect to me, but it didn't include handshaking, right? And it would have been very awkward for this senior person had I stuck out my hand, right? And so needing to understand what is appropriate for that interaction in that culture, in that social situation is essential. So this is the definition of terms on this first page with abilities. And then you can click at the bottom here, you see these tabs, you can click on the speaking tab. And now you can see at level 0 and 0 plus, what kinds of traits we should be looking for. And then you can, drag this bar over if I want to see for level 3, right? And then you can see for each category, oops, I dragged it a little too far, right? So, they can speak with sufficient accuracy to participate in formal and informal contexts and general social and professional tasks and topics. That's level 3. That's the general statement. And then it breaks it down, right? Mid-level vocab, basic, they can handle basic and some complex structures, right? And you can go through and you can look at it. So I feel like this is a helpful resource, at least to me, it's been very helpful. I'm going back to the main ILR homepage. I'm going to go to the new skill level descriptors and speaking. And I just want to encourage you to click here for the color-coded PDF file. I can't go back to not looking at it all black anymore. They've color-coded it, which I love. So things in green relate to that first thing we're looking at, the functional ability. Red is the precision of forms and meaning. Content meaningfulness is in black. Contextual appropriateness is in blue. And they do this for every single level, right? And so you can look at your level and you can see each of these different areas and you can pick out, first of all, what you're shooting for. So if you're trying to get your soldiers to level 2, you can say, here are the things we need to be working on. We need to be able to report facts. We need to make simple recommendations. We need to describe, we need to give directions, we need to give instructions, we need to tell stories across different time frames, right? Everyday interactions and complications. You can, put that in your curriculum. Ask them to report facts about a reading. Ask them to describe a situation, have them give directions, look at a map and give directions somewhere, right? Have them give instructions, have them lead a session and give instructions to the rest of the group on what they need to do, right? This is something at level 2 they need to be able to do. And you can see here, like some of the topics, they talk about casual conversations, personal life, family, work, current events, right? And so it's all in here if you really read it and kind of go sentence by sentence. And so this is just a wealth of information back here on those websites. So I'm gonna head back to my PowerPoint and you can see here, I'm reminding us of those 4 areas, and then areas 2, 3, and 4 have those subpoints. That's what's color coded in those statements, and they have a sentence for each of these things. So you can really kind of pinpoint exactly where your soldier is missing something, or you can really have a great description of what it is that they are able to do. So these are resources for you to look at. All right, so let's take a little bit of time to look at some of the different levels. And level 1, I started here because some of my soldiers, at least, were still in the 1 range when they arrived. We were trying to get them to 2. This is my list based on, the skill level descriptors and, the notes I have for what I'm thinking of when I'm looking at an intermediate or level 1 speaker. Remember, they're not necessarily the same thing, but I've put them together here just for our purposes. So this is survivor language. That's why you have that picture there. They can create with the language. This is huge, right? It's no longer a memorized phrase. They're sharing a personal message. They've memorized chunks, don't get me wrong, but they're recombining them to share something personal. Everyday vocab, everyday events, their life, their family, so on and so forth. Usually full sentences. But remember, when I say cannot systematically control for time, they can't always, when you ask them a question in the past, they can't always answer in the past, right? They can't always answer in the future. They don't have a lot of rhetorical devices, but they can handle a simple situation or interaction. They tend to be more concrete, right? It's their world. And they need somebody who wants to understand them sometimes, right? So they need that sympathetic listener. They can ask and answer questions, and that's a really big deal. You got to get your soldiers to ask you questions too. You share about your interests and your passions, but they have to ask you, right? Because they are really good at answering questions because we do that to them all the time. We need to make sure that they can also ask questions. So level 1 is sort of that survivor. And you guys did a great job of coming up with questions when we met yesterday. And so this cartoon, I think it was funny, can you explain the technical problem in terms I can understand? And his answer is network broke, must fix. That's a 0 answer. But you can see the boss there, he's asking questions. That's a level 1. That's an intermediate kind of thing. And so an intermediate person could be, tell me about or what did you do this weekend? Not tell me about. That's a level 3 prelude. Or sorry, that's a level 2 prelude. Tell me about your weekend. That's telling a story. That's level 2. What did you do? What do you like to do on the weekend? Intermediate. What do you like to do on the weekend? What is a typical day for you? Intermediate, right? How many people are in your family? Intermediate, right? So those kinds of things. Getting to that level 2, here is where I'm skipped down to number 6. Here's where we're asking them to tell a story, narrate, describe, explain, compare, right? Oh, you live in Florida, but you used to live in Washington. Compare those two places. Level 2 are paragraphs, organized, cohesive paragraphs, and they can speak in the past, present, and future all the time. So when you ask them a past question, they're going to do the past all the time. So you could say, tell me about your weekend. For a 1+, you could say that too, right? So, these things are just suggestions, right? Things to keep in mind. It's blurry, of course. They can handle a complication. They can talk about current events. They can handle somebody that's not used to non-native speakers. Circumlocution means if they can't find the word, they can talk around it. And a chart I'm going to show you at the end kind of talks about these guys as the reporters, right? Have them interview each other. Tell me about, your childhood. What are your favorite, what's your favorite food? And then they could compare what everyone in the class liked, and those kinds of things. Talking about those current events, trying to move them to a little more abstract things is what we want to kind of be doing here. They won't like that. They like to be more kind of concrete if they can, but this is where we want to start pushing them sort of to the next level. So, and so here's our advanced one. And this is, I picked this cartoon because you can see like Dilbert's trying to figure out how to end it. We were talking about taking turns, right? And knowing when to end and knowing when to stop. At the advanced level, they're getting better at this, right? And so we can say to them, tell me about your weekend. What news stories are you reading? What interests you about the world? And we can get them to start to talk about some of those things. They still kind of have that connection. It's news stories they're interested in, but then we can go from there and introduce some complications. So now we're moving to superior, roughly maybe level 3. Here we have extended discourse. They can talk for, several paragraphs together, organized, right? They are supporting an opinion. They are justifying their viewpoint. They are hypothesizing. They can play devil's advocate. They can give a formal speech, usually to like a group of their peers or something, right? They're not talking to the ambassador, but they can give a formal speech. They can handle a non-sympathetic listener. They can handle abstraction, right? And they can handle linguistically unfamiliar situations with no patterns of error, right? And so when I think about 3, I really think kind of about that abstract discussion about an issue, right? And so some people, we were talking yesterday about, China maybe invading Taiwan, right? We need to be careful not to like prompt them a certain way because, and again, it's because we want them to support an opinion and justify their viewpoint. We don't want to give that to them. So we could say like, oh, you mentioned that you're reading about, China and Taiwan. What do you think about the situation between China and Taiwan? Right. And so then they might say, we think it's great, or we don't think it's great. We don't care. I know we care. But as a tester, I am not interested in what they say necessarily. I'm interested in how they say it, right? So it's not like there's a right answer. And I know this is culturally hard to hear. This was a topic that you guys picked, so I know it's a sensitive topic, but, and my teachers are all from Taiwan and we're watching this closely. My current teachers happen to all be from Taiwan. We're watching this closely. But it has to be okay for them to say Taiwan, China should invade Taiwan. And it has to be okay for them to say China should not invade Taiwan. From a linguistic standpoint, they just have to be able to explain why and justify it. And then, so whatever they say, I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. There are people who say the opposite. Why are they saying the opposite, right? What possible argument can somebody make for the opposite of what you just said? And then they have to defend the opposite viewpoint. And that's essential. So we want to be careful not to give them too much language. We want to let them talk. And then I usually do 3 and then 5, and then I come back to 4. And I'll say, wow, that's really interesting. So we've got 2 sides to this issue. What would happen if? And then I give them that hypothesis. And you got to be careful. Some new testers I've seen will say, I asked them, if you won $1 million, what would you do? And they answered it. And that's a hypothesis. So they're level 3. Absolutely not. That's not a level 3 question. We are looking holistically, first of all. So, to actually rate somebody is a lot more complicated than we're talking about today. But we're talking about a hypothesis. So maybe I'd say something like, if China were to invade Taiwan, what would be the impact on, US diplomatic relations in that part of the world? Right? That's a level 3 hypothesis. That's the kind of thing we're talking about, where we're talking about this abstract issue, and we're asking them to talk about what would happen if, in this abstract, larger place, right? And so this is what level 3 kind of looks like. And as we were talking, we kind of gave some suggestions of what a question could be. You can see this cartoon, two lines, right? It's getting more and more complex. They're talking about reparations. That's a sensitive topic, right? And so at level 3, some of these issues can get into sensitive areas. We need to be careful, of course, that the questions we're asking are appropriate in our target cultures. But a level 3 person can handle and needs to be able to handle culturally difficult conversations. They can handle those complexities and some complications, and they can handle complications. So we do need to we can't be afraid to have those conversations. That is linguistically what we're asking them. Remember that last category: cultural appropriateness, social appropriateness, interactional appropriateness. We are looking for those things. So when a sensitive topic comes up, are they handling it appropriately? A level 3 person can, a superior speaker can. They can figure out how to get away from that person at the dinner party without causing a scandal. A level 2 person might start fighting back because they might not know linguistically how to get out of that situation. And now, of course, there's all sorts of reasons why somebody who's a level 3 may choose to fight back. And I'm not making any judgments, right? But I'm just trying to give you some examples, right? A superior speaker is going to be keeping in mind the social context, the cultural context, the interactional appropriateness, and they're going to have good strategies for dealing with those sensitive topics that come up. So let's move to level 4. And I hear we're going to have some level 4 speakers maybe coming up. We don't often. And so Shams wanted to make sure we got to talk about this a little bit. Here's a list of things I keep in mind when I'm looking at a level 4. They can convince and persuade and advise. And again, my level 1 students can do some of this, but there's a difference. So if I ask, this is an exam question. They just took an exam. This was one of the questions, a student from Haiti is coming to Concordia. It's really cold. And well, as you know, in Bemidji and at Concordia, what advice do you have for them? And they use the imperative: wear a jacket, eat at McDonald's, drive slowly, right? They can do very simple sentences at level 1. And, some testers will say, that's advising. No, that's not what we're talking about at level 4. At level 4, we're talking about it. The example I gave is, maybe I'm on social media and I'm posting inappropriate things. You want to convince me that I need to think otherwise about the way I'm using social media, right? You want to convince me to not drop out of college. We're talking about things at a different level, right? And so again, some delicate situations, it takes tact. We're talking about the contextual appropriateness that has to come in for all of this. We are looking for complexities and sophistication. And then some of these, again, there's a continuation of level 3. The upper levels could do everything at the bottom levels and this. right? So they are going to be able to support an opinion. They're going to be able to talk about a concept. But one of the things that the new skill level descriptors have really emphasized for number 4 is that you really do need to include those counter arguments. It needs to be balanced. So a level 4 speaker isn't trying to convince you necessarily that, this is the only way to look at something. A level 3 speaker might do that because they're supporting their opinion, and that's the only language they have. It's like, this is my opinion and this is why it's right. And then they can tell you what the opposite opinion might think, because they need to be able to represent a viewpoint other than their own, devil's advocate. But level 4 has a balanced approach to doing that. So they might say, so what was another example? We had cloning, yesterday, and they might say, wow, that's a complex topic. Should clones have rights? Here's why some people are saying they should. Here's why some people are saying they shouldn't. Here's how I weave my way through all of that, right? And so they're kind of recognizing the validity of both sides of the argument. Now, of course, there may be some arguments where they might say, I'm sorry, I can't see the other side, but if you ask them a good question, and you guys came up with great ones yesterday, cloning, artificial intelligence, there's a whole debate on those two topics, right? Is artificial intelligence good, or are we waiting for the next Terminator to come down and kill us all, right? Or the Matrix, to take over. So these are situations that are facing our world right now. And there's a lot of smart people on both sides, right? That's a good level 4 question. When it's something where people are, and even if, even if you feel really strongly about something, you want to pick a topic where there can be an argument on both sides. And again, there's topics we're not allowed to ask, right? Like, and you have to keep in mind what's appropriate for your culture. So, we're not supposed to ask about religion or, taboo topics, right? But if it's appropriate in your culture, and sometimes it might be important. If I'm a Chinese teacher, maybe we need to be talking about China and Taiwan, right? We need to have that sensitive conversation. And levels 3, 4, and 5 speakers are going to have the strategies linguistically to be able to do that in an appropriate way. And if not, we need to teach them that, because that's part of the rating. Can you talk about this in a culturally appropriate way? So I've got a couple things here. On the left, we have the old description. And on the right, we have the new. You'll see there's a lot of the same things, but they've been retooled. You've got those 4 areas, right? So a level 4 speaker can speak with considerable precision using culturally appropriate language tailored to a variety of audiences on a wide range of topics. If you ask them to speak to kindergartners, they know how to speak to kindergartners. You ask them to speak to college students, they can speak to college students. You ask them to speak to, the city government, they can speak to the city government, right? They can give that formal speech at a conference. They can give advice. They can represent their position at length and represent a viewpoint of someone else's in prepared and unprepared remarks. So you can go onto a topic like that. You can't just pick something out of the blue. Like we've been talking about China and Taiwan, and I say, hey, what do you think about Haiti? I can't do that, right? But, I could say, wow, we've been talking about Taiwan. Well, in Asia, we're also dealing with this threat in Korea, and it's kind of destabilizing the whole region. And I could go there and ask them now to be able to talk about that, the regional destabilization, in an unprepared way, and a level 4 person can do it, right? They're organized. We've got rhetorical devices. Their vocabulary is extensive and sophisticated. They have cultural references, right? Every once in a while, maybe an error, but it's acceptable language use in certain contexts. And so these are what we used to think about as native speaker errors. Like I will say, hey, can I ask a question? And can is to be able to. I really should say, I have a question to ask, or may I ask a question? But we don't say that. So that's okay at level 4. And you can go on and read, but one of the things to think about that I want to just say before we move on is this using emotion, right? So if you think about some of the most persuasive speeches that you might see on TV, they are using emotion and mood to add to their argument, right? To emphasize or to create authority or to, express uncertainty. So a level 4 speaker is able to use different strategies, such as this relational aspect, to be more effective in the way that they are communicating. And it's really cool. And I like how we pull that out. We've all seen that. We've all felt that when we're watching somebody and we're like, wow, that person's a great speaker. We tried to go back and figure out, why are we saying that? What is it about that person's speech that is resonating? And I think this is something that I feel like this is something that I was trying to explain and I didn't have the words to explain. And now it's kind of in there. So sometimes at level 4, it may feel like you want to faint because, you really have to prepare, at least I do. And when I'm giving a test, I don't know, anything about the speaker in front of me. So I don't know if they're going to be 4 or 5. So you have to be ready. You guys know where your soldiers are going to be at. So those of you who are anticipating level 4, you got to sit down together and you need to write questions, because that cultural aspect is so important. Nobody can write them for you, right? You need to think about, complex issues and concepts at level 4 that are going to require insider cultural knowledge. And so a cultural insider kind of really has to write those questions and think about it. Again, you don't want to have a script of questions you ask. You do want it to be a conversation, but boy, you do have to prepare. It's best to be preparing and practicing ahead of time. Again, as a tester, I'm not allowed to impose my questions on the examinee. So I got to be ready to come up with one on the fly, but the prep of writing them helps you do that for me. But in your curriculum, obviously you're not testing the same way that I am. You can come up with some really great level 4 questions and then, have your soldiers practice those and work towards this, because it really takes a lot of work. I'm going to try to give you an example, and I don't think it's great because I'm still working on this. It's really hard to do, but I'm going to give you an example in a minute of how I try to do that. Let's look at level 5 quick, right? And you're going to see a lot of these same things that we saw at level 4, but to an even higher level. That level 5 person has really no instances of error. They can speak to anyone about anything at any time, right? And one of the biggest difference at level 5, I think, is at level 4, we have this balanced discussion about something that's abstract, a concept. But at level 5, we are weaving in different concepts to create a new idea. So when you have a level 5 person, you've got everything that we've been talking about. And that's the person that kind of makes you, they talk about something and their approach is so fresh that you're just like, wow, I never thought about that. That is really interesting, right? They have woven together different concepts in a new way. It's allowed you to understand it in a different way. Everyone from level 3 and higher can kind of explain things that are unfamiliar to you, but level 5 is sort of like that light bulb moment when you're like, wow, I never thought about that. So that's amazing, but it's not a unicorn, as my trainer would say. So here's the old and the new one with level 5, right? The level 5 used to say speaking proficiency is functionally equivalent to that of a highly articulate, well-educated native speaker, right? We talked earlier about some of the limitations of that description. Now it says able to speak with clarity of expression and precision using diverse linguistic resources to produce articulate, nuanced, and engaging language in almost any context. One thing about level 5, they can set the tone. Level 4s can do this a bit too, right? So they're not just following you. They can set the tone for the meeting, and they are using that tone and that emotion with high efficiency, right? With complete flexibility. And then here in that green, that second sentence, they can effectively weave together different concepts to create novel ideas and perspectives, right? So for me, that's one of the things for 5 that you know it when you hear it, right? It's really powerful. So they've gotten rid of references to well-educated native speaker. That's gone, right? And so really look at the new, we don't have any fives, but just to kind of let you know where things might go to. So here's my imperfect way of trying to think about things, right? So when I'm testing somebody with ACTFL, they taught us to kind of spiral up, right? It's really hard. You can't just kind of hit at level 5, right? You got to work your way up to something. So maybe we're talking about climate change, right? And we were talking about climate change yesterday at my conference. So that's kind of why I put this on here. So, at a level 3, I might say something like, gosh, we saw flooding happen in Dakar, last week, and people were killed, and some of it is the way that the city is being built around structures, and some of it's related to climate change. What do you think that the government of Senegal should be doing to address this issue? Right? Supported opinion, level 3. I've given them a context. I've sort of grounded this issue, and I'm talking about climate change and how it's impacting the structure of the city of Senegal. Okay. So now they're going to give me their opinion on climate change, and they might say, oh, I don't believe climate change is real. I do believe it's real. No, that's not why the city flooded, right? It has nothing to do with climate change. It's this. All of those are okay answers, because we're kind of wrestling with this idea, did climate change, did this flooding that happened, is that normal flooding? Is it different flooding? What should the government do? But I need them to get to that what should the government do, like to get to that piece of it. They can't just go off and say, gosh, yesterday, yes, it was terrible. I had friends that were involved, and in my city, this happened. That's a concrete response. That's a level 2, right? They need to sort of engage at that level 3 abstract level. Okay. So now we've talked about it. And so then maybe I come back and say, okay, well, so we just talked about the government response, possible responses to climate change and flooding in the city. There are people that say that humans have a right to live in a safe environment, right? That we should demand clean drinking water and a safe place to live, and that's a basic human right. And then maybe I turn it and say, what do you think about the government's plan to build a nuclear power plant just up the road? That's kind of what this picture is showing. Or, what is the role of government in that? How can the people, assure that they have the right to live in a safe environment? How can they enact that in tangible ways? Now, if you listen to my question, and again, I'm not saying these are great because I'm, sort of just doing them like this, but my language has elevated. Tangible, right? That's a more sophisticated language. So in my question, I'm elevating my language, and that sophisticated listener, that level 4 person, is going to hear that I've raised my register, and they're going to match it. They're going to realize that the relational context has moved up, and they're going to move up with me. If they don't, it's usually they didn't realize it. Well, that is contextual appropriateness, right? Or they can't do it, precision of forms and meaning, right? Whatever it may be. But I'm looking for, complex grammar. I'm looking for complex vocab, right? You have to be looking for all of those things in their response. And then a level 5 person is kind of weaving together these different things. So, we've talked about flooding and climate change. We've talked about the role of government. We've talked about if it's a human right to have a safe environment, and also balance that. Like that level 4 person might say, wow, that's a really complex question. Of course, every human has the right to live in a safe environment. However, the government also has a responsibility to provide energy to its people. And we had last night, my internet went out probably every minute for just a few seconds. There are rolling blackouts. Everybody has generators, but clearly the electrical grid is overtaxed. Now it is the hottest week of the hottest month of the year, but we don't have enough electricity to provide the people with what they need And that also contributes to a safe environment. And so you see how I've tried to now have a balanced discussion. That level 4 is kind of recognizing both sides. Yep, of course, we should have a safe place to live. But, maybe there is a place for nuclear energy. I don't think Senegal's thinking about nuclear energy, but do you see what I mean? They're going to find that balance, and they're going to present both to you in a balanced way. And now level 5 is going to weave together these different issues and concepts. So it's that and then they come up with that new idea, right? And so maybe they introduce human migration. People are moving out of the countryside into cities, or maybe out of the cities, in away from the flood zones or whatever it may be, because they need a humane living environment, And so that level 5 person is going to put things together in a way that you never thought of before. And that's really going to make you think, wow, okay, that's a new take on things, right? And so maybe, because I don't think Senegal is thinking about nuclear energy, I'm not an expert, but I haven't seen anyone talking about it here. Maybe I bring that up and I say, most of the United States is actually powered by nuclear energy, according to something that I read, which said that there's a nuclear power plant within 200 miles of most people, and they just don't know it. What would it look like if Senegal were to start nuclear energy? Who would provide it? What would that mean? Would that help, in fact, provide a more stable electrical situation? There would be an environmental impact, of course, on that one area. However, it would allow us to, get rid of some of the things that are some of the electrical poles and the infrastructure that's blocking the waterways that caused the flooding, right? And so now maybe I've introduced a concept that makes you think, holy cow, how interesting. I don't know that you think that's interesting, but do you see what I mean? And that level 5 person is doing it. They're using mood, they're using tone, they're controlling the conversation, they're directing it, and they're weaving this all together in an extended way with no errors. So that's kind of how I will try to build up to it. If you do truly have a level 4 speaker, you're going to have to probe. You're going to have to ask questions at level 5. Right, to try to get them to develop. Level 4 is really, I hope you do. In Korean, I heard maybe Korean, you guys are the ones that might have it. That's awesome, right? You're going to have to really sit down and think about some high level issues, concepts, very abstract things as a group of testers, a group of teachers, I would say, and start to write, what could we talk about? How could we, and again, I don't want to tell them nuclear energy is a situation, right? If you see on my picture here, that's not mentioned anywhere. They come up with, a solution in a balanced way at level 4. And then at level 5, they're bringing in this new idea that maybe people haven't thought of, that makes you, and you don't have to agree with it again, but it makes you think, wow, yeah, that's a new take. That's a fresh take on things, right? So that's my example for sort of level 5 there. And I put this cartoon in because he, sometimes it's overwhelming, the complexity, and we want to reduce it to one variable. And we'll especially see that at our level 3 people. Level 2 people will just give up. And remember, if you only want to be asking questions kind of one level higher than where they are at. So it's really important to kind of do some assessment work early on, have those conversations informally. Like that first day, I asked all my teachers to walk around and talk to people and then tell me where they thought they were. We talked about proficiency a little bit as a team, so they kind of knew what to look for. They told me where they thought everybody was, and then I made groups and we tested it, right? Because if they're level 2 and you ask them a level 5, they'll faint, like that fainting goat cartoon, right? You gotta, and if, or they'll just try to reduce it to one thing. Well, actually, that's a simple question. Everybody has the right to live, period, which is true, but it's much more complex than that, right? And so you want to just ask one level higher. So it's important for us to know all these levels and then be able to provide questions that will help them work at developing the sorts of language that we need to show that they have that level. All right, here's the chart that I kind of referenced earlier. It's I don't remember who made this. I guess the Clark County School District made this, Jay Wardle, but I like it. It's only going to work. This is levels rough. It's, Novice, intermediate, advanced. This is the ACTFL scale again, maybe 0, 1, and 2. But I like it because it kind of helps us remember that 0, that's the parrot. They're repeating back, right? They can't really say what they want to say. And in yellow here, those are boxes for the students. You can tell them, here's what you need to work on to jump up. Intermediate, those are those survivors. They can handle they can survive and cope in the country. And intermediate high, they can do most work requirements. They can handle all of these simple transactions. We need to celebrate that. That's really still powerful. Soldiers can do a lot with intermediate high language. And advanced, now we've got those complex subjects. This is the news reporter that are interviewing people. They're telling a story in the past, present, and future. They're speaking in paragraphs. They can talk about more abstract things, right? Maybe not, the same way that a superior and higher speaker can, but they're moving beyond their own little personal world to look out a little bit more. So I will share this with my students so they can kind of see what they can do. It's powerful to have a list of what you can do. So often we focus on what we can't, and then move to the next one. And it also reminds them and reminds my teachers, right? The only place that grammar comes in, right, is 1/4, and it's 1/4 of 1/4 of a category. So, grammar and vocab are important, but they are 2/8. Well, it's more than 8, but you know what I mean? Like they are 2/4 of 1/4 of the whole thing that we're looking at. But at advanced, they do need to handle past, present, and future consistently 100% of the time, when you're talking to them. And at superior, 3 and higher, there are no patterned errors. We are looking for those things, but lower than that, we are not looking at grammar. So we need to, as a teacher, a regular classroom teacher, sometimes I get fixated on that. That's why I had all of those graphs at the beginning to remind myself and you, communication is at the center. If they can communicate their message, especially at these lower levels, I don't care how they do it, right? At the higher levels, I am looking, is it culturally appropriate? I'm looking at all of those things. But at the lower levels, especially, we're just focusing on communication really all the time, right? But at the higher levels, that communication gets more nuanced. Well, thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful. There's my email, and sorry I missed you guys at CLB, and I look forward to connecting with you very, very soon. Have a great day. Take care.